everybody, welcome to the second tutorial. So what we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to be using a variation of what we've just done, which is the 3D camera track, okay? But this time we're going to be creating a camera first before we attach anything, and then we're actually going to be putting objects into 3D space rather than attaching them to the tracking nodes in the room. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to open up our footage. This is the digital media room footage, and again I'm just going to drag this down onto my create composition symbol there. Okay, and here's our footage. Like so we're moving through the room, like so, and turning around like that, moving over. So I'm just probably going to stop it there. I mean, I don't think we need loads of this footage to get the effect. Okay, so the reason why this one is different is because what I'm doing is, rather than just moving down the corridor and tracking something onto a moving object, as you can see, what I'm doing this time is I'm sort of swinging the camera around. I'm kind of investigating the space rather than just simply walking through it. Okay, and so what we're going to do this time is we're going to take our footage and we're going to go to our camera track and we're going to track that again like we did before, and I will wind this on and we'll come back in a minute once it's done. Okay, so that's now done. So as you can see, hopefully based on what we were talking about last time, if you remember, these little tracking nodes here, they get bigger as they recognize that something is closer to the camera, and smaller as they recognize that something is further away. And so what's happening now is, as we move through, unlike the corridor, which is a very basic shot, this one's got a lot more going on, hasn't it? Because obviously we've got these sort of sweeping pan kind of effect with the camera, and there's also some blurring effects going on as well as we move, and so on and so on. Okay, so there's lots going on, and it's had to kind of work quite hard to track that, but it's sort of done. It seems to have done a pretty good job. Okay, so what we're now going to do is, instead of I mean, what we can do is we can do as we did before. We can attach a grid, for example, to this bit. So I might sort of collect that, sort of click on that, create solid in camera, and then I can just go over here and go to grid and put my grid onto this, so we can kind of just check it and see how we think it's working. So let's move that. Does it seem to be working effectively? Yeah, I'd say so. It seems to be working effectively against the bits of furniture around it. Yeah, that's all looking good. Okay, so undo that. So I just was Command and Z, if you remember. So back to there, in case, because we don't want those solids. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the 3D camera tracker. If you can't see that, you might still be on the project window. So click on this tab here, and once it's all done, just click Create Camera. Okay, and now what it's done is it's created this 3D camera, this virtual camera, which, if you remember, the idea is that as the camera which filmed the footage moves, that virtual camera will move in exactly the same way, so that then when we put things into the scene, it'll effectively be being filmed by that camera. Okay, so what we're now going to do is we're going to just do a sort of slightly contemporary style floating icons type thing, just as a sort of bit of fun, really, and then you can go and film something yourselves and have a crack at this. So what I've done is I've given you some icons that I've literally just shamelessly nicked off the internet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by picking up like this Wi-Fi one, for example, and dragging this one down over the top there. So there's my Wi-Fi logo. It's on an alpha channel, which means it has a transparent background. Okay, so there it is. And what I'm going to do, just a little tip, if something is black and white, what you can do if you want to change the tone of it, this is obviously isn't to do with adding color, but what I want to do is I don't want that to be black, I want it to be white. So what I'm going to do is go to the Effect tab first of all, and I'm going to go to Color Correction and Hue and Saturation, and a nice quick way of changing this round is literally just to add the master lightness and bring that up, and so I can make that white, or I can make it slightly off-white if I want to, whatever. Okay, so there we are. Actually, there's a bit of background in that, isn't there? I might just dial that down a bit. And then what I can also do, there's a bit of a stripe I can see there. So what I'm also going to do is just Effect and Keying, Whereas we used the color range previously, there isn't any color in this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the extract tool. Okay, so here's the white that's in our scene. Okay, so what we need to do is we just need to change the background to try and get rid of some of that the white there. So that's getting rid of that from there. So we're going to go this way instead. Just move that slider until we get rid of that background. I'll show you this in a bit more detail in a minute in some of the other clips. Okay, so there's our Wi-Fi logo. Okay, at the moment, as you can see, the footage moves and that just stays where it is. But the moment we click this box here to turn this Wi-Fi logo into a 3D object, then all sorts of interesting things start to happen. So now we've got this these 3D controls here. You can either control it on the actual image, or again you can open up the properties of the clip, the transform controls, and you can do your X rotation and your Y rotation and your Z rotation from there. Okay. You can also adjust your position, and you'll notice, if I turn this off again, you'll notice that at the moment position is just the X and Y axes. So I can move this side to side, and I can move it up and down. Okay, but of course the moment I make it 3D, I've now got a third thing, which is the X axis, and I can move that forward and back in Z space. Okay, but I sort of find it a bit easier when I'm positioning things like this in a scene like this to actually do this by you've got to be careful when you're doing this. So if I'm going to move it from side to side, for example, I can click the X axis, and if I move this up and down, it's going to rotate. Okay, but if I click it from side to side, then I can move it in that along that X axis, and I can also do the same with my Z axis. You see what I mean? So basically what's happening here is this is a 3D object. If I just click on that and move it around, then obviously I'm not moving it in 3D space, I'm just positioning it on that Z plane. Okay, and if you look what happens now, if I position that just sort of in the space like that, because I've created a 3D camera tracker, and because this is a 3D object, as I press play, that will now hover in space and I can move past it. Okay, so I felt that wasn't on the screen for very long, so I'm going to sort of move that back, and I'm also going to scale it up. So it kind of looks similar, but now if you imagine, it's now further away from me, but it's bigger. Okay, so now it should stay on the screen for a bit longer. There we go. Nice. So what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to add a number of these kind of digital pseudo kind of assets onto the screen, so I can create a sort of a floating collage, if you like, that I can move through. So I'm going to come back to my project, and I'm going to select my phone and move this down to the top. Now, as I say, I shamelessly stole these off the internet. So here's a quick trick for things like this. If you take your rectangular mask tool and just mask around that, for example, I'm going to get rid of that vector stock logo at the bottom. Okay, now what I'm going to do is on this same clip, I'm going to go to Effect and Keying and Extract, just like I did before. So here's my effect controls, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial this back until I just get the black and white logo. So I've now got a nice transparent background. But what you sometimes also find, you can keep going until you get that point, but what you can sometimes see is, if we zoom in on it a bit, you might be able to see this, that the edges, it's not working so badly on this one, but you can see the edges here are a bit kind of pixelated. It doesn't look as nice and smooth as it could do. Okay, so then all you need to do, you can either drag this across the bottom like so to soften it, or you can just use your white softness dial and just drag that across, and what that will do is it will soften that white that it's taken out. So then as we move that now, it should hopefully give us a slightly softer black edge. Okay, there we go. And now of course all we need to do is go to Effect and Color Correction and Hue and Saturation, and I'm just going to whack that master lightness up to make it nice and white, maybe a little bit of off-white compared to the Wi-Fi logo. And now I'm going to turn this into a 3D object, and I can move this back in Z space. So I'm going to move that away from me like so. That's my position, so I'm going to move that away from me like that. So it's going to go behind the Wi-Fi logo like that, and I can move it up like so, and I move it across a little bit just so it's easier to see. I don't know whether I might rotate it as well, just a little bit. Okay, So these are both on the same plane. I mean, what I can do is I could go to my my Wi-Fi logo, and I could go, I'm going to rotate you a little bit so that you're not quite sort of, you're all both facing the same way. And now, if you can see what's going to happen as I move, then this logo, so this icon, sorry, symbol, icon, getting confusing myself there. These are obviously now in 3D space, so I'm going to say to myself, it's a little bit close. I might just click on my phone and I might just move this back a little bit more in 3D space, like so. Oh, don't know why you're being particularly difficult. Oh dear. All right, fine. Move you back like that. Scale you up a bit, like so. And now that will, like so. And you can see what's happening now, can't you? That what's happening is these are objects which are now moving independently of one another, but also related to the movement of the camera, can't you? Like so. So you can keep doing this until you can create an interesting kind of composition. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to start positioning something over here now. Okay, sorry, my computer glitched out there, so I hope you caught that. So what I'm going to do now then is, obviously we've got these two icons floating in space, which is all fine. But what happens when we want to move something over here? You know, so I think it's the same principle, but what you've got to do is it just takes a little bit more practice, really, just in terms of visualizing the space. So let's take another one. Let's go with like laptop, for example. Bring that down, and I'm going to draw my rectangle around it, just like I did before, and I'm going to go to Effect and Color Correction, sorry, and Keying and Extract first of all, and go into my Effect Controls. I'm going to drag that down like so until it starts to disappear. There we go. And now I'm just going to bring that white softness out until I get that, and then back to the sort of transparent background so it looks nice and smooth. And finally I'm going to go to Color Correction and Hue and Saturation, and I'm going to bring up that master lightness like we talked about before. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my turn this into a 3D object. Okay, so now I want this to start appearing over there, and of course what's happening at the moment is that as I if I push it over there like that, that all looks fine. It looks like it's over off the screen. I should be able to see it, but wait, because of where it is, as I move through my scene, I'm going to basically, it's going to be behind me by the time I turn. Do you see what I mean? In terms of 3D space. So what I'm going to do is open up my transform controls, and I'm going to push this right back into 3D space, like right back. Okay, so that I can kind of really get a sense of it, that it's far away. Okay, now what I can do is I can just push this across like so. And now, as I progress my footage, theoretically, that ought to be, yeah, over there. So now what I can do is move this up a bit, and I can still move it back a bit more if I want to, and I can rotate this around like so, and rotate it like that, so I can kind of see it a bit better. Okay, and that kind of looks all right. Maybe I want it sort of there. And now I can just scale it up so it's visible. It's nice and big, and now effectively what's going to happen is that's off the screen, so as I'm seeing my floating icons, that, and there's my new one, okay, sort of floating above that computer there like so. Okay, I'm not quite happy with that. It kind of just doesn't look quite right, does it? Sometimes it looks like it's the wrong perspective because it's only a two-dimensional object, so I might move that back again in 3D space bit more, so it's sort of over there a bit more. Do you see what I mean? I might rotate that a bit more like so, so that it kind of just looks a bit more connected. Okie dokes. So there we go. So there are other things that you can do. I mean, I've given you lots of different icons here, so that you can create a whole kind of like collage, so you can kind of move through them, duplicate them if you want to, and create a kind of a whole range of different things. Okay, but I'm not going to sort of sport with your patience by doing that all now in this tutorial. The last thing that you might want to do though, it depends on whether you want to do this or not, because obviously these are clearly not there in real life, so you're not expecting to sort of see these working the way that they perhaps would in real life. However, what you might find is that it can sometimes just look nice to create a bit of depth between these icons. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off, I'm going to looking at my Wi-Fi icon, for example, and as I get closer to it, I might be sort of saying, well, you know, maybe this thing will actually start to go a bit out of focus as I get closer to it. Okay, so I'm going to get it to about here, something like that, where I can still see it. Okay, and now I'm going to open up, click on my Wi-Fi, and I'm just going to go into my effect and blur and sharpen, and I'm going to go to, you can go to a movement blur if you want to, because obviously you can see the background's blurred as well, and you might want to apply movement blur to all your assets so that they look like they were actually floating in space. It's entirely up to you. What I'm going to do for this one now though is I'm just going to add a Gaussian blur for now, which is like a mathematical blur. Okay, and then I'm going to open up my Wi-Fi, and you can see my effects in here. So there's my Gaussian blur. So I'm going to open up my Gaussian blur, and I'm going to turn on the stopwatch for blurriness. So at the moment it's at 0, and then as my Wi-Fi logo moves off the screen, I'm going to bring that blurriness up so I can go like so, I don't know, sort of, yeah, 17, let's say, something like that. Okay, and then as it moves off the screen, it just softens. Do you see what I mean? So you can do things like that. I mean, if I want to, I could perhaps sort of say, yeah, it's going to start to go out of focus a bit earlier, so I can move that focus point back to there. So as I get closer, it gets softer. I can move it like that. Do you see what I mean? It's entirely up to you. And then you could do the same thing with your laptop. You could say, right, that's out of focus to begin with until I kind of get a bit closer, and then it comes in. So if it's out of focus at this point, I might get my Gaussian blur on my laptop, effect, blur and sharpen, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to open up the properties for that one. Now there's my effect properties, there's my Gaussian blur, and I'm going to say, right, at this point where I first see you, I want you to be at about, I don't know, let's say 10 on my blur. So like so. 10's not quite enough, is it, because it's far away, so I'm going to soften it up a bit more to sort of, let's say, like 30, something like that. Okay, because it's obviously further away. And then as I get closer, so like now, like so, I might want to sort of say, right, now I'm going to bring you back down to 0. And so what happens now is I'm going to undo that first one. There we go. So now I'm going to be saying, right, blur, and then gradually make it nice and sharp. You know, so it's entirely up to you. It's just a way that you can kind of soften up these effects a little bit, make them look a little bit more interesting potentially as you get closer to them. A nice way of doing it is to actually position something directly in your path. So if you can position an icon right here floating in space, so you actually almost go through it, that's quite a nice effect as well. But I'll leave you to experiment, because obviously this is quite a long tutorial already. So I'll leave you to give it a go, and then once you're sort of comfortable with it and you're happy, then by all means go out and film some stuff yourself and see what you end up with. Nice one. Okay everybody, just a quick final add-on. I'd finished the tutorial earlier, but actually I went through and just did a few more bits and just sort of thought, well actually I haven't quite explained something properly, so I'm just showing you what I did. So this is what I've got so far. It's not quite finished because I'm going to change the Gaussian blur and bits and pieces, but by positioning assets in front of the movement of the camera, I can sort of fly through them and that sort of thing, which is, you know, it depends on your point of view, whether you feel it's effective or not. I can kind of, you know, I look at it sometimes when I run it through and think, yeah, it's not bad, and sometimes I look at it and go, it's a bit hokey, but anyway, whatever. So basically I've got a whole bunch of different assets now running. But I think one thing that I perhaps wasn't explaining earlier when I was moving them around is that you can actually pivot the asset in order to sort of position it using these the X, Y and Z lines rather than doing it down here, so you get a sort of better sense of exactly where it is going to be positioned on the screen. So let me just give you an example of what I'm talking about. So if I, let's say for example, I want to duplicate this headphone icon, okay, and place it over here somewhere to sort of double it up, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go Command D, to duplicate it, and I'm going to drag it up to the top, just so I know that the top ones are over on the left and the bottom ones are over here on the right. Okay, so at the moment we can see which way my icon is oriented because of the way that this Z line is pointing. So we can kind of see that the plane of the asset, this two-dimensional asset here, is kind of pointing that way. Whoops. Like so. Okay, and so if I now grab that Z space and I can move it back like that, do you see what I mean? But of course that's all very well, but actually what I might want to do is pivot it around like so, and now I can grab that Z space and I can move it over here like that. And of course what that does is it just means you're not having to throw it all the way back in Z space to bring it back again. You're kind of fighting yourself if you were doing it the way we were doing it earlier, where you're pushing it back into Z space and then moving it across. So if we just bring this through now, and I'll show you what I'm doing. So we've got to the point now where we're turning and we're not seeing that now. So if I now grab that X handle and move it this way, now I ought to be able to see in 3D space, there's my headphones. Okay, so it just gives me a better sense of where they are. So I'm going to move that like that, and I'm going to move it over here now like so. So as it pans around, obviously forget the Gaussian blur because that's the Gaussian blur from the first effect. So I might want this to be like over here, for example. So I'm going to move it that way and like that. There we go. And rotate it like so. I'm going to open up these properties actually and just turn the Gaussian blur off for now, just so I can see it, how it's going to be positioned. So it's kind of tilting backwards a bit, isn't it? So I'm going to grab my X handle and just tilt it that way. Yeah, it's kind of working. So you can see now what's happening is that rather than throwing it back and then having to kind of drag it all the way across and what have you, I've just pivoted it and now moved it into the space. And that's how I was able to get these things in front of the camera nicely, you know, nice and neatly, is just by sort of making sure that they weren't going too far back, because it's sometimes hard to kind of tell when you've got no frame of reference exactly how far back within 3D space these assets are. So by pivoting it and moving it kind of roughly to where you want it, you can then be a bit more precise about how you're positioning those assets. So that's not too bad, is it? It's not quite enough on the screen as I come through the camera, so I'm going to move it to there, like that. There we go. And now, as we play it through, let's see, let's go through the first pair of headphones, and there it is, just floating in space there. Nice one. Cool. So then I can start to add my Gaussian blurs and bits and pieces to match up with these assets as I get closer to them and that sort of thing, just by using the Gaussian blur effect and then putting the stopwatch on and adding the blurries. So there we are. So that's the end of the effect. So by all means have a crack at this one, and then when you sort of feel you're happy with it, go off and shoot your own, and look forward to seeing what you've got. Nice one.